Welcome to National Report here. Joining us as we begin what many are calling Z-Day. President Donald Trump is welcoming Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenski at the White House this morning as we take a live look in Washington, D.C. on this Friday, courtesy of EarthCam. So the two leaders are expected to sign a long-debated minerals deal. There's a lot to it, but this agreement would grant the United States access to Ukraine's vast mineral resources. Rare earth minerals, by the way. Of course, both leaders discussing potential peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. What does this mean if they're mining in this area? Who is there? What does that mean for security? Where are these minerals? Are they in Russian-occupied territory? So many questions about this, and we'll get to the bottom of it. Thanks so much for tuning in to National Report here on this Friday morning. Good to see you. I'm Sean Kreisman.
And I'm Christina Thompson, filling in for Emma Rackenberg. President Donald Trump, he also welcomed the British Prime Minister to the White House yesterday, where the two discussed the future of the ongoing war in Ukraine. Starmer, the Prime Minister, says his country is ready to put boots on the ground in order to support the peace deal that Trump is working tirelessly to establish.
However, there was a major moment at that meeting when President Trump accepted an invitation from King Charles to visit Britain, making him the first elected political leader in modern times to be hosted by 2 state visits by a British monarch. If you missed it, we have it. Watch.
Very importantly, I was just notified by letter from King Charles that he's extended through the Prime Minister a historic second state visit to the United Kingdom. And that's a great honor because it's never happened before. One person has never been extended that honor, and I really do call it an honor, but it's not for me, it's for our country. It's respect for our country. So I just want to thank you, and I want to thank King Charles. Thank you very much, and we accept.
The late Queen Elizabeth welcomed Trump for a 3-day state visit back in June of 2019. That was during his first term in office. Trump attended an opulent state banquet and a private lunch with the sovereign, as well as having tea with Charles, who was then heir.
Yeah, as of now, no date, though, for that future visit was announced. But this was the moment where Prime Minister Starmer handed over that envelope from King Charles, as stated in this very major moment. Again, 2 state visits or invitations for that to be done there in the UK for President Donald Trump. But what it does, and it very well put by the president, of what it means not for him, but for the American people, putting the American people first, as, again, this administration touts. But moving forward with how many leaders, how many European leaders have visited, as you take a live look here at where the press is outside of the White House on the North Lawn. But you think about how many European leaders have already visited this president, have come to this president. Some state leaders have visited Mar-a-Lago. He has visited with others as well, spoken with Middle Eastern leaders. Now you have King Charles sending out, again, a second invite here for a state visit. It's seemingly a lot of different state leaders, again, these foreign officials wanting to come together with this president. Again, in such a short period of time, it makes you wonder, what does the next several years of this presidency look like? Well, we know what today looks like. That's Zelenski. For more on Trump's meeting with Zelenski, we'll check in now with Chief White House correspondent James Rosen, which is where that camera angle just was behind the scenes. He's live on the North Lawn. Good morning, James.
Sean and Christina, good morning to you. When President Zelensky arrives here at the White House about 2 hours from now, it'll mark the 4th meeting for President Trump with a European head of state within 1 week's time. And Zelensky himself will find the atmosphere here quite different from previous visits when he was lionized as a Churchillian figure. Preceding Zelensky here yesterday, as we noted, was the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, who maintained his unlikely bromance with the Conservative president, but who failed to extract pledges from him of an American backstop for the European peacekeeping force being assembled for post-war Ukraine. However, it was in the Oval Office session with Starmer that President Trump began to distance himself from his earlier characterization of Zelensky as a dictator.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Asked later if he owes Zelensky an apology for the dictator label, President Trump expressed admiration for Zelensky and said he expects a good visit wherein, as we've reported, the two will sign a pact granting the U.S. access to and significant profits from Ukraine's rare earth materials. Mr. Trump's last meeting with Zelensky was in Paris, as you can see here, back during the transition. Starmer, for his part, reminded his American host of the stakes in the Russia-Ukraine talks.
There's a famous slogan in the United Kingdom from after the Second World War. That is that we have to win the peace. And that's what we must do now. Because it can't be peace that rewards the aggressor or that gives encouragement to regimes like Iran. We agree history must be on the side of the peacemaker, not the invader.
Where Prime Minister Starmer stood and spoke those words, President Zelensky will stand, according to the White House schedule, at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. After that, President Trump heads back to Mar-a-Lago for the weekend. Sean and Christina.
All right, Chief White House correspondent, that is James Rosen, joining us here on this Friday morning. James, always good to see you. Thank you, sir. An investigation by the Israeli military determining that Hamas was able to carry out the October 7th attack because the IDF misjudged the terrorist group's intentions. It's all according to this report, showing the Israelis also underestimating Hamas's capabilities and was unprepared for the surprise attack by thousands of heavily armed terrorists, this in the early morning hours of a major Jewish holiday.
Outgoing IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi is taking the blame for the Israeli army's failures, saying that he was the commander that day and that it is his responsibility. Now, this is the same conclusion reached by past reports by military officials and analysts. Mike Huckabee is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Ambassador Huckabee, thank you for coming on. We appreciate your time. What do you think? Was Israel underprepared?
Well, obviously they were. Let me just say I'm the nominated ambassador. I've still got to clear the Senate confirmation process, which I hope will happen very soon, and I'll be able to be deployed to Israel. But 2 times in Israel's modern history, since 1948, they've had disastrous moments in which they were unprepared for the attack. One was in 1973, the Yom Kippur War, which happened to be the year that I made my first visit to Israel. And then, of course, October the 7th of 2023. In both cases, the consequences were dire. And I think Israel will never again make this mistake because they do understand deep down that there are people out to get them. As the old saying goes, you're not paranoid when they really are out to get you. Let's be honest. There are forces, they are demonic, evil forces, and they're not just interested in taking a little bit of land away from Israel. They're interested in taking every bit of land from Israel and killing every Jew alive. And that's why anti-Semitism is such a dangerous thing in our world today.
Yeah, I want to get to that in just a moment in terms of anti-Semitism and that living here in America. But first, I wanted to ask you about this. An Israeli official saying that the IDF is not leaving the Philadelphia corridor. Again, this is something that was promised along with this ceasefire hostage release deal, if you will. But they're staying. At least that's what this report has said. There was seemingly a shift when the announcement of the Bibas family was returned, and then Shiri, the mother in the Bibas family, was not, and only to be returned at a later date. But what tugged at most people's hearts was that 9-month-old baby that was taken, and then obviously once the autopsy was performed, it found dead and brutally beaten just a couple months into being held in captivity. That obviously angered Israelis, and did that play any role, perhaps in your mind, in the IDF choosing to stay in place at the Philadelphia corridor?
Sean, I think they don't have a choice. There is no negotiation with Hamas that represents anything of honor, decency, and trustworthiness. They just are not capable of that. They've made it very clear, even in recent days, that their goal is still the same, to kill Jews and to annihilate Israel. So they haven't changed anything. They just want to have Israel back off and let them have time to rearm, regroup, and do more mayhem. So the fact that the IDF and the State of Israel is going to continue to prosecute the war against Hamas should be no surprise to anyone. It would be a bigger surprise and an outright shock and, frankly, stunning if Israel said, yeah, we're just going to walk away and let Hamas get their arms back and, heck, come back at us again, which they've pledged to do. So there's no choice here. Israel must continue the complete annihilation of Hamas because Hamas has its goal as the total annihilation of Israel.
The fact that that's not a viewpoint that is 100% agreed upon is baffling to me. If you look at the partisan gap of views when it comes to Israel, they're at a record high right now. If you look at the latest Gallup poll, 60% of Democrats hold a negative view about the Jewish state. When you look at the same poll, 83% of Republicans have a positive view on Israel. Does this surprise you?
It shocks me. It's not just a surprise, it's really disturbing. And I can remember that there was a time when Democrats were probably more supportive of Israel than Republicans were. At best, it was an even sense of support because we recognize Israel is a democracy surrounded by totalitarian governments and dictatorships. It has free elections, it has free speech, it has freedom of movement, it has extraordinary development of economic free enterprise. All of those things mirror us. They are a Western civilization, modern nation. And for Democrats to be embracing their enemies and actually being against Israel is something I cannot get my arms around, other than if you look at the very Democrats who are out there saying we need to waste more government money, we need to do more dumb things like put men in women's sports, then I guess we can just conclude they've lost their ever-loving minds. And this is why I think increasingly voters are rejecting them. Let me just add, the most disturbing part of this is that it's younger Americans who are least supportive of Israel, which tells me our education system has failed miserably in helping these young people understand what freedom looks like and what oppression looks like.
Governor, if I can just pivot to a separate war, Ukraine, Russia. I know you're watching this as well. President Zelenski meeting at the White House with President Trump. This will happen today. There will be a bilateral meeting and then a bilateral press conference this afternoon at 1 p.m. But this has to do with rare earth minerals in Ukraine. There are obviously issues there with Russian-occupied areas. I'm curious to know of what you think about this meeting today with Zelensky and Trump and moving forward to securing peace between both nations.
You know, after several years of just blood-curdling kind of war that has killed perhaps millions of people, both Russians and Ukrainians, I think it's incredible that in a very short period of time, President Trump is already meeting with both Putin, Zelensky, bringing ideas to the table that have not been discussed. And the notion that he's saying to the Ukrainians, look, we've put billions and billions of dollars to help you defend yourselves, but we would really like to work out something for the future so that the American taxpayer could get some of that money back for standing with you.